If you ache for truth, goodness, and beauty, if you're hungry for a Christianity with substance and strength, if you long for a faith that's big and bold and biblical and all about Jesus Christ, if you're inspired by the idea of one church that has spanned 20 centuries, 24 time zones, and 2 hemispheres, enfolding every race, nation, and language, then you're considering Catholicism.
Welcome back. This is part of our, I guess we're continuing our OCIA, the Bridge to Rome series. And I'm doing this one with Cory. Cory, say hi.
Hello,
yeah,
everyone.
Cory's here. Cory the Nameless, or Cory the Nicknameless, which is still kind of a sore point, I think, on all sides, because we have so many listeners that want to give Cory a nickname, and he so resists getting a nickname. So it's kind of like,
you can't force it.
yeah, he who shall not be nicknamed. But in any case, Cory is going to join me for a couple of conversations here on the OCIA Bridge to Rome series. And as I say at the beginning of all of these episodes, these are in no way intended, nor can they, nor should they replace the OCIA curriculum that your OCIA program director or pastor is using in your parish. You need to follow, the assigned curriculum. However, I know that a lot of you are appreciating this series as a kind of preview. Maybe you're considering Catholicism and wondering what kinds of topics might be covered in OCIA. I hear from a lot of you that are in OCIA that these have been helpful as a kind of, supplement to what you're getting in the class. And surprisingly, a lot of cradle Catholics have written me and said this has been helpful for them because it's kind of like a refresher course in the basics of the faith. So wherever you fall on that spectrum, I hope that this is helpful. And what we're going to talk about this evening is 2 conversations that I think should be helpful. And the first one's going to be where you can go to Mass, your options for where to go to Mass. And then the second one is going to be what kind of Mass should you go to or can you go to? So let's dive right into this. Why don't we start with the most basic option, which is to walk into your neighborhood parish church. Tell us about parish churches.
Yeah, so that really is the default or the starting place. So a parish is a territory within a diocese. So basically the whole world, the whole Catholic world is divided up into dioceses, and so that's an area that's governed and cared for by a bishop. And then the diocese is then subdivided into smaller territories that are parishes, and they're going to have at least one church. So that's your parish church. And a parish church is going to be led by a pastor, so the priest who's in charge there. And he has the responsibility for the care of souls of everybody within that territory of the parish. And so obviously that'll mean the Catholics there, but he actually has a responsibility for other people as well to evangelize, to share the gospel, and to care for them spiritually. And so if you are living in a place that has a Catholic diocese and Catholic parishes, which is most of the world, then you have a parish. You have a pastor. The church has assigned someone to be responsible for your spiritual care. And so that's the default. Like you have, even in canon law, you technically have a right to spiritual care in the parish that you reside in. So wherever you happen to live. And so it might be just down the block within walking distance, or if it's a larger parish in a larger diocese, it might be further away. But that's a good place to start because it's already assigned to you.
I had somebody just the other day, an old Protestant friend who I hadn't seen in a long time, and I don't think they realized I'd turned Catholic or something. And I mentioned that, I was not only had become Catholic, but that I was working at a parish. And they said, well, what do you have like a priest there? And I said, yeah, we have a priest. And you go, oh, you don't have a pastor? And I go, no, we do have a pastor. You go, well, but I thought you had a priest. And I go, but no, I mean, our pastor is.
Yeah. So the confusion is in titles.
So a priest is, you can explain this, but what somebody is, but a pastor is a role. And it's relevant here because when we're talking about parishes are led by pastors. So you can be a priest but not a pastor of a parish. So a pastor is a priest assigned to shepherd a parish, right? I mean, you want to unpack that? Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and the word pastor means shepherd in Latin. So he is assigned to be the shepherd of the parish. There may be other priests there. Many parishes have other priests assigned to them that are, subject to the leadership of the pastor and work under his direction. But so the pastor is in charge, and the authority that he has is for the purpose of caring for souls, for being the shepherd of those people. And so it's a job that's assigned to him by the bishop for a particular parish, or sometimes multiple parishes. So yeah, a priest is an identity, it's a sacrament. Priests can have various assignments. They could be a pastor, they could be an assistant to the pastor, they could be in a religious order, they could be working at the diocese, they could be a hospital chaplain. There's lots of different things that a priest could do because that's an identity. But your pastor is a job at the parish.
So let me test two propositions here, run them by you, right? All in the Catholic Church, all pastors are priests, but not all priests are pastors. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes. Yep, that's right. So you've got the big circle that's priests, and there's a smaller circle inside that's pastors.
And then everyone who celebrates the Mass, who can, quote unquote, do the Mass, is a priest. But not all priests are pastors. So some of them, that's the point of this episode. Some priests celebrate the Mass in some other place, not as a parish priest, right?
Yep.
Okay.
That's
so
correct.
we're going to talk now about the other kinds of places that some priests, those who are not pastors of local parish churches, other places that priests celebrate Masses, that a listener might be able to go and attend Mass. But before we do, because I have to do this because it's a compulsion, I have to get in my history of Christian history or Catholic history or history of Christendom thing here, because I think this stuff is interesting, but I'm not sure everybody else does. What I think is interesting is that, we use the term diocese and how the world is divided up into dioceses. And that is actually a holdover from the Roman Empire. So the word diocese comes from a Greek word for administration, but it was the Emperor Diocletian, and it's just a coincidence that the words sound alike. The Emperor Diocletian in the 3rd century organized the Roman Empire into these administrative districts. Like a diocese was maybe kind of like a county, size of a county or province, divided up provinces. And then you would have like a magistrate, a government official over each diocese. And that was like to administer things like, the roads and the laws and taxes and whatnot, right? And the kind of headquarters of a diocese was a basilica. Basilicas were actually Roman administrative buildings before they were churches. And then parish, the word parish, comes from the Greek word for neighbor. So they became basically the neighborhoods that are within these administrative districts, dioceses. Because when the Western Roman Empire fell, the church just kind of took over that structure. Does that make sense? And so you put a bishop over each diocese instead of a magistrate, and then you put a pastor in each parish. And that's how you end up with Saint so-and-so's on the corner of 3rd Street, 3rd and Maple in your town with Pastor McGillicuddy. And the whole world is divided up that way. Okay, so there's my trivia night. If any of you end up winning Final Jeopardy because you knew about parishes and dioceses coming from the Roman Empire, then I expect a fat envelope with a portion of your winnings.
Yes, please be generous to Catholic, considering Catholicism.
But Cory is going to move us in more productive directions here because, as we said, the baseline standard in the Catholic Church is you go to a parish church where a pastor celebrates the Mass, and that pastor reporting up the chain of command to a bishop, to the Pope, et cetera, et cetera. But there's all these other priests out there that are not pastors of parishes that celebrate Masses in other places. Cory, what other kinds of places might someone attend a Mass?
Yeah, so there are two main ones, and they're related to each other. They're oratories and chapels. And so when we talked about parishes, we talked about churches. A church, technically defined in canon law, is a sacred space for the celebration of the sacraments that the faithful have the right to attend, to go into, to pray in, just because they're the faithful, and that's allowed. Oratories and chapels are a little more specialized. And so an oratory is set up usually for the use of a particular group. That might be a religious order, say the Dominicans or the Franciscans, or there's lots of other, a Benedictine monastery or what have you, probably has an oratory that primarily is used for the religious order, but they often will, make it available to the faithful in general. They typically do. Even if they're cloistered, oftentimes you can attend Mass at an oratory for a religious order.
And
then there are chapels.
Just jump in, because you and I have both done that many times, not together, but both of us have gone and stayed at or visited monasteries and religious orders and celebrated Mass with the monks or the friars, which is a wonderful.
Or there may be convents of sisters where they have a priest come in and celebrate
the
Mass there.
And what I guess I'm sorry to interrupt you, but because I want to encourage people that it's really, really cool. If you live somewhere where there's the opportunity to go and celebrate the Mass, attend Mass at a religious order, at a convent, at a monastery, at a religious house, something like that, where there's an oratory or a chapel, then it's really neat, because it's going to be the Mass, and we'll talk in the next conversation about the different types or styles of Masses, but it's going to be the Mass. But a lot of times there's just a little bit different, flavor on it to it, because of the nature of it being in a different, as a part of a religious house or a religious community. And if you have something like that at your parish, don't you, where you work?
So there's a neighboring parish in our city that's run by Jesuits. So it's actually the student parish at the University of Michigan, St. Mary. I don't actually know I think technically they're established as a parish rather than as an oratory, because it isn't just for students. There are other faithful who attend there as well.
Okay, so I narrative. So oratories,
oratories
at religious, that often are associated with a religious house or religious order. And then you were going to distinguish what's the difference between a chapel and an oratory.
Yeah, so the distinction is subtle. Chapels are also sort of technically private sacred spaces, so they're erected usually for either one person, like a private chapel, say for a bishop or in a priest's residence, or for like a small group, whether that's, a small religious order or a chapel at, say, a college or a university. So it's meant for a particular group or small group or individuals. And so it's not the sort of thing where typically you would be a member of it and just randomly walk in off the street, but you could potentially.
I'm going to have you explain the student chapel or student ministry thing in a moment. But before you do that, just a vocabulary, right? So when you talk about chapels, a chapel is like a place, but it's also like an architectural term. If you go to a really, really big church, like a basilica or a cathedral, you go to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, whatever, there's all of these side chapels, 2 or 3 or 5 or 6, or I think St. Peter's has like 4 or 5 different side chapels in it. And then at those side chapels, sometimes they're side altars and side chapels, they actually hold Masses. So you can go to the big basilica or the big cathedral and attend Mass in a chapel. And that's more of an architectural term. It's the part of the church, a sub-unit where there's an altar.
Yeah, a chapel can exist as part of a larger church, as part of a larger sacred space, or there are chapels that are, sort of freestanding.
Like at an airport or at a military base or on a campus. Why don't you talk about campuses? Because I know we have a lot of listeners that are in school, or maybe they live around a college or a university. And as I said, my first time I ever attended Mass was a Catholic friend invited me to go to a student chapel run by like a student ministry during the day. So maybe you could talk about that a little.
Yeah, so there's some variety here in terms of campus ministries and how they offer masses. Anything from sometimes there's a whole parish erected near the university, and students are especially catered to there, but other Catholics attend as well, to there being, essentially a private chapel for the use of the students. And in a lot of those places, they do welcome other Catholics and other curious people to join them for Mass most of the time. So it's not private in the sense of never being open, but it's specialized. It's sort of catering to that community that it's erected
And
for.
I'm sure we'll get into this more in the next conversation, right? But in some sense, the Mass is the Mass is the Mass. But again, who you're celebrating it with and where you're celebrating it, it has a different, I don't know what the word I'd use, kind of like different flavor to it a little bit because of the context of the community. And when you go to those student, any of these ones that we're talking about, but particularly like if you go to some campus ministry type thing, there are going to be some little differences in terms of, because the campus minister or whoever is a priest, but he's not a pastor. And so it's not going to be a full service church in the sense that they're going to necessarily perform all the sacraments there. They may not do confirmations. They may not do OCIA. They may not do with, First Communion. They may or may not perform baptisms. They'll probably do confessions. And there's a campus mass. All priests would administer the anointing of the sick. But the kinds of things that a pastor would do in a parish church, where you'd have First Communion classes and confirmation classes and all these sorts of things, that may or may not happen at an oratory or a chapel or a student ministry, right?
Right. Yeah, it would vary by who is being served there. So you mentioned military chapels. That's a little bit more full service because, if you're in the military or your military spouse, that's, where you live, and you need all of the services of a pastor and of a parish there. And so that chapel or oratory is probably going to offer the works. But at a college, especially if there's a parish nearby, it will probably offer what is most needed: the Mass, confession, other things that the students would tend to do, Bible studies or educational programming for students. And then, like, for instance, at Hope, the chaplain collaborates pretty closely with the pastor of the nearby parish. And so if there's a student who is seeking baptism or
Right.
confirmation, they're going to do that in collaboration with the local
So
parish.
this is where those of us, you and I, because we work in parishes, can talk inside baseball in front of the listeners. So part of that has to do with whether or not the priest involved has what are called faculties from their bishop or from the local bishop. So, for example,
Yes.
only a bishop really has the right to confirm people. And so, therefore, you may have, for example, Father so-and-so who's the cool, hip student pastor at the university, but he may or may not have the faculties from the bishop to do things like baptisms and confirmations, in which case, as you said, what he's probably going to do, there's going to be a local parish, a few blocks away off campus with a pastor who reports to the bishop. And if he has a student that wants to go through OCIA and get confirmed or whatever, he's going to say, hey, go to the parish down the block, because that parish pastor not only celebrates the Mass, but he has all of those faculties to do all of the sacraments, kind of a full service church. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
So you can go to the Mass at all of these places, but some of them are going to be more or less full service in terms of all the other sacraments and ministries, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. I literally could not do this without you, because this show is 100% listener supported. There are no ads, no sponsors. So if the episodes are helping you to understand the faith, to answer your questions, or draw you closer to historic Catholic Christianity, would you consider becoming a patron? For as little as $5 a month, you'll get every regular episode organized into topical playlists, plus exclusive bonus content, extra conversations, video Q&As, deep dives, live streams, behind the scenes, and more.
just head to patreon.com/considering Catholicism or tap the link in the show notes. Together, we're educating, equipping, and exciting people about the beauty of the Catholic faith.
So that covers the kind of religious houses and communities where you have an oratory, a chapel, student ministries, maybe like military chaplains and things of that nature. What are some other kinds of things? Let me throw one out at you, and that is a mission parish or a mission church. Not called a mission parish. Real key. It's usually called a mission. What do they call them? Like mission stations or mission churches. You see these a lot in rural areas where
Yes.
as I understand it, there's not enough people or resources to sort of hit critical mass to become a parish. Because to become a parish, you have to have enough like resources and people to sort of be self-sustaining. So a lot of times I know there's places here in the Midwest where you can go and you're 40 miles from nowhere kind of thing. And there's a small group of people. There's 30 Catholics in the area, and they have like a mission, sometimes we call it a mission church or something, where a priest from an established parish comes over and does masses there. But it isn't I'm talking too much. You explain that.
No. Yeah, no, I mean, you explained most of it. Yeah, so it's either going to be in a rural area in a place where the church is established, like, as you said, here in Michigan, if you get further away from the big cities, or in a mission territory. Like, there's plenty of them throughout the world, and not just in the places you'd expect. I mean, yes, in places like Asia, where there's not a huge Catholic population in certain countries, or in rural Africa, but also in places like Alaska, where it's just a diffused population, sometimes a poorer population, and they're not self-sufficient, as you said. And maybe they don't have enough priests for there to be a pastor there on the ground, 7 days a week. And so maybe he comes in on Sunday or as often as he can. But those are really good and important and vital for the people who live in those places, because otherwise they wouldn't have access to the sacraments.
Yeah, as you say, you'll see this around the world. And surprising, like you say, not just out in the middle of nowhere in, the middle of Africa, 1,000 miles from nowhere. I mean, I've been to Africa. I love Africa. But I mean, what I'm trying to say is those are the kind of things you might immediately think of. But even in parts of the world that are maybe crowded and urban, there's going to be some city or part of a city where there's not a critical mass of people to be a parish. It's interesting you talk.
Sometimes it's to serve a particular community. Like, there are mission parishes in the U.S. that are like for a Native American group. And that brings up another sort of subset, is that there are sometimes parishes that serve a particular group, and you might fit into that group. In the U.S., there are like African American parishes, or there are parishes that have a charismatic spirituality that focuses on the gifts of the Holy Spirit more. And so those are things that might possibly be in your area, or there are other rites besides the Latin rite, or what people think of as Roman Catholicism. So various Eastern churches that might be in your area as well. And as long as it's Catholic, you can go to that mass. It's going to be different, but you have the ability to do that.
You burn airtime with another personal anecdote, because it's my show. But my wife and I every summer go up to this island that's along the Canadian border, in the Great Lakes, and you have to take a ferry to the island, and there's a little cabin we rent out there every year for a few days, and in the summer, and there's a mission church on the island, and of course that area is pretty sparsely populated and whatnot, and I think there's a priest from the Balkans, I think, but he's got like 4 or 5 of these mission churches that are spread around the islands and stuff along the Canadian border. And then what he does is he'll just, like, on different days of the week, he'll go there. And so he takes a ferry over to the island, and he does mass on, Tuesdays and Fridays on this island. And it's, so a lot of times those kinds of things are available to people. I think interestingly about mission, we can't really call them a mission parish, because the whole point is they're not a parish church, but mission churches or mission whatever, is a lot of times you would think that those are always in the ascendancy. In other words, they don't have enough people to become a parish yet, but
They're growing.
there are places around the world and in the United States too where parishes have shrunk and the number of Catholics has declined. And so what used to be a parish kind of falls below the threshold of being a parish, and it becomes clustered with some other churches, and it ends up becoming a mission, a Catholic mission. So, again, all of these places you can go to, a priest will celebrate the Mass there, but it's a different context and community.
Yep.
And then I like the point that you made about some of them, because we've talked about ones that are, by the Franciscans or the Dominicans or the Jesuits or whatever. We've talked about students, but like you say, some of them are going to be kind of ethnically divided, where you're going to have, like you said, Native American, and linguistically. You might have Navajos who speak Navajo, and so there's on a reservation, there's a mission, Catholic mission that's in the Masses in Navajo or something. I don't know. You know what I'm trying to talk about that.
Yep. Yeah, and so that's the church trying to minister to people as effectively as they can. So sometimes it's easier to reach people if you're reaching them in their own language, in using, kind of their own culture as a starting point, especially if it's distinct from the other people around them. And so that happens in probably various places in the world, and historically it's happened even more in our country. There used to be the Polish parish and the
Right.
Irish parish and the German parish, and that's not as big of a phenomenon nearly as much anymore, at least in this country. But you're still gonna go to places, especially in your larger cities in the U.S., and where it's like, this is historically the Polish parish, and there's the statues of the Polish saints, and they offer Mass in Polish once a month or something, and or what have you, some other language or cultural group. And so that's another way in which it's going to have sort of a distinct cultural flair to it.
As we kind of wind this episode down and making the point to people that there's a lot of places that you can go and celebrate the Mass, right? Receive the Eucharist.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a couple ways to think about that. One is just logistically, where's the closest place to go? What's the most convenient place for someone to go? But you can also look at it as, where I'm going to the Mass because I want to receive the sacrament, right? I want to go receive the Eucharist and celebrate the Mass. What I think makes another dimension to that is the community you're doing it within, right? So the sacrament is the same, the Mass is the same, but it does add, I've used the word a couple times this evening, flavor. If you're doing it with the Dominicans, if you're doing it with students, if you're doing it on a military base, if you're doing it on a Native American reservation, or if you're doing it with the Italians or with the Polish or whatever, it adds a whole sort of dimension, because if you think about it as, I'm just going here to get the sacrament and then get my car and leave, you can think of it that way. But if you think of, where am I going to go to Mass, because what kind of community do I want to be celebrating the Mass within? And I want to find a community where I feel like I fit. That brings up, I guess, the point that I want to kind of close with, is that we aren't bound by the geographic parish. Because as you said tonight, parishes are divided up geographically, territorially. And so the old idea was, well, you go to your geographic parish, which is the closest place to where you live. So I go to the church that's literally physically the closest to my house. Actually, in canon law, the Catholic Church does not teach we are bound to go to our neighborhood parish. So some people are going to say, hey, there's another place I can go to Mass in the area where I feel like that community, because of demographics, because of language, because of whatever, because of, the character of the community. Like if you're going to go to a religious oratory or chapel, or, you want to be with the students, or you want to be with, the Italian people or whatever. Part of it, I want to encourage people to go to Mass. But if you're trying to find a place to go to Mass, one is, where's a valid Mass? And the second is, where can you celebrate that Mass and it nurture you the best in that community?
Yeah, there's a sort of tension here that I think people have to navigate, and there are principles, but there aren't strict prescriptions, as you say in canon law. You're not required, as you say, to go to your territorial parish. There is a sort of preference for it in the law. So say you're going to get married, or you want to be, someone has asked you to be a godparent for their child who's being baptized, or a sponsor for someone going through OCIA. The parish where you're going to get married, or you're going to be a sponsor for a sacrament, is going to need to verify that you are Catholic in good standing. And that's the responsibility of your pastor and any staff that your pastor has hired to help him with that responsibility.
So glad.
And
Yeah.
so like there's a sense in which your territorial parish is home base, and like they're responsible for you. And even if you don't go to mass there are situations in which that's gonna come up if you're Catholic for long enough. But there's all. Do you want to say something about that?
because this is part of what I do in my day job, right? Which
Yeah,
is
exactly.
that you said, the pastor has staff people to assist him. So one of the things that I end up doing is, when it comes to some of those sacraments, things like baptism, weddings, other sacraments, we have to deal with the administration of those things properly. And canon law does say that your pastor, the pastor where you are registered, has jurisdiction, has pastoral responsibility for you. So every single day, it seems like, we're dealing with sending back and forth letters of delegation or godparent affidavits where you say, okay, I'm registered to parish A, but I want to be a godparent or get married in parish B, or get my kid confirmed or baptized in parish C. And then what we need is the parish where you are a member, where you are registered, the pastor who has that jurisdiction, like pastoral authority over you, has to verify, yes, Bob is a Catholic in good standing who meets the following requirements, and I'm willing to sign off on that. Because this is the important point. You can't be a Catholic at large. You can't, you can think, oh, I'm Catholic, but I don't belong anywhere. You have to belong somewhere. The only point I was making, and I think that the Catechism makes the point, that we're not, you have to belong somewhere. You have to belong to a place, and you have to have a pastor and a church and a parish church. But you can change them. Like we have people, there's, as you well know, there's two parishes in our town, and some people change their membership between one or the other. So it isn't always, well, I live 3.6 miles from this parish and 4.2 miles from this one, so I have to go to this one. People do have options and they do change, but you have to belong somewhere and you have to register somewhere. But I am also saying too that you may say, hey, there's also a college in our town, and I really enjoy going to mass with the college students, or there's a religious community, 20 minutes away, and I sometimes really enjoy going to mass with the Dominican friars there, right? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. And people are free to do that, and that can be of great benefit to people. So there's definitely something to consider as you're thinking about where to attend mass. I think there's a tension, or maybe a bit of a caution, because there is something good about the territorial parish, because it's, by definition, it's going to be your neighbors, the people who live near you, and that's a sort of natural community. Now, in modern America and in many other places, where we have a lot of problems with, actualizing the community. We don't know our neighbors. We're not very plugged in with each other, and that's a problem, because it separates us from our brothers and sisters in Christ. It separates us from the people who are in need in our parish, who we have a responsibility to help, to do the works of mercy for. And so there's a goodness to being connected in some way to one's territorial parish, because these are the people that are your neighbors, and God specifically asks us to love our neighbors. And it also, there's a danger of choosing a place to go to mass and to have a community that kind of isolates you from the rest of the Christian community. It puts you just with the people that are like you or that you like. And there's a good thing in that, of course, in being in a community with people who are like you, but it can also be a way of sort of ghettoizing the church and separating people from each other. And so you can go outside of your territorial parish for a good reason. You can go outside of your territorial parish for a questionable reason. And there's no sort of one size fits all here. I think it's something for people to think about and to pray about.
I think that's a great place to land this episode. And I actually want to add my voice to that, or, my endorsement to that.
Mm-hmm.
What I was trying to say earlier is you're not required. You're not canonic. There is not a stipulation in canon law that you must draw a radius from your house and attend the parish geographically closest.
And there's not going to be a bouncer at the door, checking your ID to see if you're a member of this parish where you live.
That being said, I agree with you 1,000%, because when I decided to become Catholic, my instinct, my inclination was to go to the biggest, most beautiful, architectural Catholic church I could find that had, history and richness and all these things, like all the things that had drawn me to Catholicism. And so, when I decided to become Catholic, there's a church like that about 35 minutes from us, and it had all the smells and bells and art and stained glass and all that. And I was like, well, that's where I want to go, right? I want that kind of Catholic church. That's what attracted me to the tradition. And I remember at the time being really kind of convicted by the Holy Spirit, because I had spent my life, with the mega church and evangelicalism, always kind of doing the, attractional church, doing the whole church shopping thing, driving to, whatever, kind of self-selecting your community. And I was really convicted by that. And it was something that G.K. Chesterton said. I know you know this quote where Chesterton said,
I was kind of alluding to it.
You got right a little closer. I thought you were going to use it, but I can't leave it hanging here, because Chesterton said that Jesus tells us to love our neighbors and to love our enemies, because so often they're the same people. Right. And he said, and I think, I don't know if it's in the same place, but somewhere Chesterton also said that there's something that is really lonely about the people who travel great distances to find people like them, because they never sort of get out of themselves. They'll travel 1,000 miles to self-select and belong to something where they're surrounded by people who think like them and act like them and walk like them and dress like them. And there's something to be humbling and grounding about, receiving the Eucharist next to your neighbors. So I remember when we did that, I wasn't even sure where the closest Catholic church was, so I Googled it. And I looked on like Google Maps and I go, well, there's one here. And I walked in and I go, where's the smells and the bells and the stained glass and the, whatever. But I felt like I had I don't want to say ethical or moral duty. I really wanted to be Catholic. And that didn't necessarily mean going to the biggest, most beautiful Catholic building somewhere. It meant going to receive the sacraments next to my neighbors. And so I just want to endorse what you're saying. That being said, some people live in a city where there's a lot of churches in the area. And
yeah, well, and in my own story briefly with that, I mean, I can't judge anyone. Only you and God can figure this out and test your own motives. Because like when I came into the church, it was at my territorial parish. It was the nearest one to my house. And then I got hired at the other parish in town. So I then drove past my territorial parish to go to work at my new parish. And the nature of the work I was doing there, I really made sense for my family to be members there and to attend Mass there. And so we did. And then I got a job at a different parish, moved across the state, and just, how things work, where I could buy a house, I now have to drive past 3 parishes in order to get to my parish. But it's still my parish because I work there and my kids go to the parish school there. And so like we're part of that community. And so, yeah, I'm certainly not trying to cast judgment without, knowledge on anyone who doesn't go to their territorial parish. I think I just bring it up to say there are things to think about here, and don't write off your territorial parish too easy.
And again, the whole point of my story, of my experience is that I believe in that. That being said, what we wanted to talk about this evening was not necessarily how to choose where to be a member, which I do get a lot of emails about that, but just different options about where you can go to Mass. And there's nothing wrong with going out and experiencing some things. Like I said, you and I I've gone to Mass other places to see what, going to Mass with the Dominicans is like, or going to Mass somewhere else to see what this is like. And I've gone to Mass at most of the other parishes in my area. Like, I think that's a good thing. Yeah. So anyway, you've got a lot of choices about where to go to Mass. Now, with all of those options before thee, get thee to Mass. Pick one, go one, and go thee unto the Mass tomorrow or this weekend, and find a place to go and go. All right? Cory, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to talk about when you go to Mass, when you try to find a place to go, you're going to encounter some stylistic differences in the Mass from one place to another. Not necessarily substantive differences, but stylistic differences. And we're going to talk about the different kind of stylistic things you might experience at different Mass locations. Okay? All right. And in the meantime, everyone, go to Mass.
Yes.
We'll be back with another episode very soon. And this show is 100% listener supported. My patrons keep the lights on, and they let me spend more time researching and recording so that these episodes keep coming. If this show has helped you, would you consider becoming a patron? For as little as $5 a month, you'll get every regular episode organized into topical playlists, plus exclusive bonus content, extra video Q&As, deep dive courses, live streams, and more. Just head to patreon.com/considering Catholicism or tap the link in the show notes. And would you please rate the podcast on whatever platform you're using and write a review on Apple Podcasts or on consideringcatholicism.com. And you can drop me a line. Patrons can comment directly on Patreon posts or Spotify. I read every one. Or you can always use the contact form at consideringcatholicism.com, or you can email me at consideringcatholicism@gmail.com. I love hearing your questions, your comments, and your stories.